Happy Wednesday, Mount members and friends. Welcome to Bible study. This is our 11th and final lesson in our series on Joseph's journey to forgiveness. And this is a quick note. Next Wednesday, we will not have Bible study in honor of Holy Week. You are welcome to come out when we host the Baptist Minister Conference's Good Friday service on April the 7th, which is Good Friday at 12 noon. But for today, we'd love for you to help us spread the word. If you're watching at noon and 6:30 on Wednesday, we're up live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Dialpad. And we'd love for you to join us in our after Bible study chat. We sure did miss you this past Wednesday talking after Bible study. To start, I want to give you a quick recap of our journey for the past 10 weeks. If you've missed any of it, you can go back and watch them on whatever your preferred platform is. But here are the top 6 highlights. 1, forgiveness requires that you acknowledge the pain. 2, your forgiveness journey may include a season when you are waiting to be remembered. 3, Joseph teaches us that in time, God-given dreams will come true. 4, forgiveness is a roller coaster ride. There will be ups and there will be downs along the way. 5, forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same things. You must use discernment to determine when you need to set up acceptable boundaries. And then number 6, forgiveness requires us to have faith and do the necessary work, but it only truly comes through the great forgiver. It has been a journey. And if you take nothing from anything we've discussed this year, I hope it is this: God can and God will use everything meant to harm you for your good and for God's glory. By believing that God has a sovereign plan, Joseph learned to let go of the why and get to the what in his life. Early in his journey, he never could understand why. Why did God give him dreams? Why did his brothers sell him out? Why did Potiphar promote him? And then his wife, Potiphar's wife that is, unjustly accuse him? Why did he languish in prison for years? Only later could he put the pieces together and see God working through it all, even if he didn't fully understand. We've seen him wrestle with grace and test the boundaries of trust. He didn't get stuck in his journey, though. He moved forward until he got to the point where he could fully embrace and continually practice forgiveness toward his offenders. He also pursued reconciliation with boundaries to find a new normal in his relationships with his brothers. Have you ever struggled with the need to know why? I know I have. There have been times after some struggle or some trial when I asked God to clue me in on why this was happening. I felt like I needed to know the purpose of the pain, while God wanted me to focus on what I was supposed to learn from and grow through the journey. Now, as a human being, Joseph probably wondered why things were happening in his life, but he learned to trust God and to move forward through both the good and the bad times. Genesis 50 is the culminating chapter in this book. Let's start listening at verse 1.
Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed the physicians in his service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days.
I want to stop here and do a little explanation. In the women's church school class, they recently talked about Lazarus' resurrection, and a question was raised regarding Lazarus being in the tomb for 4 days and if there was embalming during the Bible times. Reverend Butler answered that in the New Testament, we read about bodies being prepared for burial with certain fabrics and certain oils, and that is true. But here in Genesis, we see that they did embalm dead bodies way back then. But interestingly, in the Old Testament, only Jacob and later Joseph are described as having been embalmed. According to the Smith's Bible Dictionary, This was probably due to their time in Egypt, because there isn't data to suggest that the Hebrews practiced embalming in this manner. Egyptian embalming was an extensive process resulting in what we now call mummification. It involved extracting the brain and internal organs, soaking the body in specific liquids, and then wrapping it heavily in bandages. This level of attention was a sign of stature in Egypt, which makes sense because Joseph held the position of the second in command in the nation. Embalming would have kept Jacob's body from decomposing before Joseph and his brothers had the time to lay it to rest in the family burial tomb in Canaan. Let's go back to Genesis 50.
When the days of mourning had passed, Joseph said to Pharaoh's court,
"If I have found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him, my father made me swear an oath and said, I am about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go up and bury my father. Then I will return."
Pharaoh said,
"Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear to do."
So Joseph went up to bury his father. All Pharaoh's officials accompanied him, the dignitaries of his court and all the dignitaries of Egypt, besides all the members of Joseph's household and his brothers and those belonging to his father's household. Only their children and their flocks and herds were left in Goshen. Chariots and horsemen also went up with him. It was a very large company.
Joseph is a man of authority, but he also is a man under authority. He could not simply leave Egypt. He had to seek permission from Pharaoh to make the journey back to Canaan. And when I hear them describe the funeral procession, if you will, I can only imagine what a sight that was. And the note that they left the children reminds me of how we sometimes try to shield our young people from the harsh reality that death is a part of life. It's a difficult conversation to have, but we as parents and those tasked to love and care for our children are required to have age-appropriate conversations so that they can learn how to grieve as well. Over the past couple of weeks, specifically last week and the week before, I've had to do 3 different homegoing services for 3 different people with 3 different situations. One of the things that I've shared in common was the fact that we don't really deal with death and the freeing nature of death for those who are dead, and then the way that those of us who are living view death can change the way we view death in particular and the way that we live. And so having those conversations about death are important. Now, I want you to remember what we said earlier. The journey from Egypt to Canaan would probably take weeks, if not months. But the brothers traveled in order to honor their father's last wish. The story continues.
When they reached the threshing floor of Atad, near the Jordan, they lamented loudly and bitterly. And there Joseph observed a 7-day period of mourning for his father. When the Canaanites who lived there saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said,
"The Egyptians are holding a solemn ceremony of mourning."
That is why that place near the Jordan is called Abel Mizraim. So Jacob's sons did as he had commanded them. They carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which Abraham had bought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, together with his brothers and all the others who had gone with him to bury his father.
For the first time since he was 17 years old, Joseph retraced the steps that he took when his brothers first sold him. Though he probably didn't travel all the way to Dothan to look into the pit where his brothers held him against his will. He likely recalled the journey between Egypt and his homeland. They abducted him, but he hadn't traveled that way. Along the way, he would have encountered the terrain and landmarks that he stumbled across while he was bound by the Ishmaelite traders. No doubt this experience would have triggered painful memories in both his heart and his mind. Have you ever revisited a place that evoked painful memories to you? If you have, that's normal. And I want you to know that if visiting a place of pain causes hurt to resurface, that does not necessarily mean that you haven't forgiven. Often it simply means that something hurt us and we remember the hurt. Where the rubber meets the road on our forgiveness journey is what we do with that particular pain. From what perspective will we choose to view the past? Where will we focus our attention of the mind and of the heart? Will we continue to see God's blessings through the harm done to us and trust God? Or will we allow our hearts to harden with thoughts of all kinds of retribution? Though we do not know for certain if this trip caused any painful memories to resurface for Joseph, we do know that his brothers began to remember their sins against him. Let's keep listening.
When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said,
"What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?"
So they sent word to Joseph, saying,
"Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now, please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father."
When their message came to him, Joseph wept.
Once again, these brothers are walking in fear. Unresolved guilt can endure for years and lead us to fear. Rather than confessing and releasing to God the wrongs from their past, they seem to be holding on to their guilt. We often suspect others of what we know our tendency might be in a situation. Perhaps the brothers are thinking that if they were in Joseph's shoes, seeing Canaan would stir up thoughts of getting even. One commentator writes, Joseph has given them no premonition or reason to think that his spirit is retaliatory, that he has been laying low and waiting for just the right moment for vengeance. This, incidentally, is the first time that the brothers actually acknowledge their guilt for what they had done to their brother Joseph. Though the text doesn't definitively say whether Jacob gave the brothers this message, it was strange for him to leave the message with them instead of with Joseph himself. Jacob had plenty of opportunity to give Joseph the message when he had asked Joseph to promise to bury him in his homeland. At that time, he could have easily added that he wanted Joseph to go easy on his brothers. It is likely that the sons of Jacob are up to their old tricks, manipulating circumstances instead of simply just trusting God. But they aren't alone in that. There is a long line of biblical men and women who practiced manipulation when they thought it would best suit them. You remember Abraham? He told Pharaoh a half-truth about Sarah being his sister. He left out the part that she was also his wife, fearing that her beauty might put him in danger. You remember Rebekah? Rebekah feared that her son Jacob wouldn't get the blessing that God promised. So she decided to help God out by manipulating her blind husband Isaac. And here in Genesis 50, we have the likely manipulation of Joseph by his fearful brothers. The next time we are attempting to orchestrate events, my brothers and sisters, or even tell lies in an attempt to save ourselves, let's remember them and make a better decision. In the text we just heard, we find that Joseph is crying again. Was his heart break due to the fact that his brothers still don't get it? Could he be sad that after all of this time, his brothers haven't learned to trust God and continue to make decisions based upon their fear? Melissa Spolstra contends that another possible cause for Joseph's tears could be his brothers' doubt about his sincerity. They are essentially questioning his character and integrity. Whether Joseph sent for them or they came on their own accord, verse 18 reveals that the brothers threw themselves down before Joseph, offering to be his slaves. Living in fear instead of faith shackles us. Now, here are the next few verses, which include what has been called the Romans 8:28 of the Old Testament.
His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him.
We
are your slaves.
They said. But Joseph said to them,
Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children.
and he reassured them and spoke kindly to them.
Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives, is the theme of the entire Joseph saga. When we walk in fear, bitterness, cynicism, resentment, refusing to forgive or consider reconciliation, we miss seeing how God wants to take even the situations that others intended for our harm and use them for good in our lives. He also wants to use it as a conduit to be a blessing to others. Our part is to simply trust and obey, for there's no other way. It sounds simple, but we all know it as a journey rather than a destination. We will not arrive at total trust in God until we are standing face to face with God, removed from the very presence of sin in heaven. Until that day, like Joseph, we might suffer through intense betrayal, separation from those we love, temptations put before us by others, and dungeon days when it's difficult to either trust nor obey. Referring to Genesis 50 of chapter 20 of verse, Stuart Briscoe writes, quote, "To say this is one thing, to believe it in theory is another, but to relentlessly hold to it in the dark days of betrayal, in the lonely years in prison, is faith of the highest order," unquote. Joseph shows us that it is possible, my brothers and sisters, to live out the truth of this verse through the highs and lows of life. Joseph's brothers meant harm toward him when they sold him, but God worked it out for good. The concept of working all things for good is the key to moving forward in forgiveness. When we get stuck and start focusing on how people have offended us, we neglect to see all of the amazing things that God has given us in spite of and because of their actions. Melissa Spolstra again helps us with some things that we can do that can be helpful on the journey to forgiveness. First, when old wounds threaten to resurface, redirect your thoughts to the blessings that come from the conflict. Number two, when you are in need of healing, hide people from your social media feeds if necessary to keep you from the temptation of making assumptions, feeling jealous, or missing what used to be. Three, when a negative thought or memory pops into your head, pray blessings over those involved. Number four, purposefully speak well of those who hurt you to others. Number five, when you encounter those who hurt you, look for ways to bless them by smiling or even initiating conversation. Joseph's grace-filled response to his brothers flowed from years of making secret heart choices, through many years of praying, many years of testing, many years of trusting God's way over the tendencies of his own flesh. Joseph moved forward in forgiveness. He persevered on God's path of grace, looking for a greater purpose, looking for a greater plan. You can move forward in forgiveness too, my brothers and my sisters. As you build endurance through your own trials, God will grow you in all of God's sufficient grace. We're wrapping up Joseph's story. I want you to listen to the final verses of Genesis 50.
Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. Also the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. Then Joseph said to his brother Israelites,
I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land, to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said,
God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place.
So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt.
The book of Genesis chronicles the beginnings of the people of Israel. For generations, this family will be referred to by the name of Joseph's father, Jacob, renamed Israel by God. That was Genesis 35:10. They will make a grand exodus from the land of Egypt through the leadership of Moses. A journey to the promised land will be filled with all sorts of lessons on fear and discontent as they wander for 40 years before reaching their destination. Later, they will be led by judges and then kings. Truly, our ending point is only the first leg of the trip for the tribes of Israel. Joseph spends his last words reminding the brothers of God's truth and encouraging them to keep on believing. God faithfully uses people. God uses God's word and all other sorts of methods to remind us that God can be trusted. Today, I want you to remember that although God's timing may not be yours, God will keep every promise that God has made to you. The exodus from Egypt would not begin for 3 more centuries after Joseph's death, but God did bring God's people home. Joseph follows his father's example of wanting his eventual resting place to be the land of Canaan. However, he does not ask for his brothers to take his body back right away and mourn for him as they did for Jacob. Instead, he wants his coffin to serve as a memorial to the future fulfillment of God's promise. He refers to his body as bones, knowing that the return to Canaan will not be immediate. Even in death, Joseph wants to remind others to trust God. Joseph's journey of forgiveness ends with him encouraging the growth of their faith with his own body. Many scholars refer to Joseph as a Christ type because of the many parallels between the two. Certainly, Jesus the Christ offered up his body to save our souls. The descendants of these 12 brothers would later be the very ones who would make false accusations and betray the Messiah that God sent to rescue them. Nowhere do we see Genesis 50:20 lived out more clearly than in the crucifixion. They surely meant to harm Jesus, but God always intended it to use for good so that we could be saved. As he suffered on the cross, Jesus uttered these words, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." The horrible betrayal, mocking, whipping, a crown of thorns, and an indescribable death on a cross. Without the sovereign plan of God, this would seem like a senseless travesty with no silver lining at all. Yet we know that God used what others meant for harm for the ultimate greatest good. And for us, the crucifixion led to our salvation and access to God the Father. Melissa Spolstra asks us to consider that forgiveness is like breathing. We inhale Christ's forgiveness for us, and then we exhale forgiveness towards others. So the more we inhale or accept Christ's amazing grace for us, the more we are able to exhale or extend forgiveness to others. People may be trying to hurt you, but unknowingly, they may be putting you in a place where God's dreams for you can be fulfilled. They might be the sandpaper that helps to smooth your edges. Perhaps they will move you down a necessary road you never would have taken on your own. And if you can see beyond the pain they are causing you to God's ability to work out a greater good or a greater plan, you can begin to see their arrows as opportunities that God can use to bring blessing and fulfill God's dreams for your life. As we come to the close of our study, we press on in our pursuit of forgiveness. We ask for Joseph's perspectives to trust God's greater plan through the daily ups and downs. We ask for forgiveness like daily food or even the very breath that we breathe. As we move forward, may Joseph's story remind you of just how intimately God is involved in all of the details of the conflicts that we experience and how God uses them to bring blessings into our lives. Joseph stands out in sharp contrast, not only to his brothers, but also to the average Christian. We talk a good forgiveness game, but Joseph demonstrated it with his life. He was surrounded by pagan religions on all sides and had no encouragement from fellow believers or even a physical copy of God's word to sustain him. When we think of our excuses for not following God into the land of forgiveness, it is humbling to know that Joseph stayed the course. Until the day that he died, Joseph believed God's promises would come true. In fact, of all of the good things we saw in Joseph's life, it was his persevering hope on his deathbed that gained him mention in the Hebrew 11 Hall of Faith. Quote, it was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. He even commanded them to take his bones with them when they left, unquote. It was this confident faith in God that allowed Joseph to, first, persevere under hardship. Second, forgive his betrayers. Third, pursue reconciliation. Fourth, believe God's promises to bring them out of Egypt. Like Joseph, we can breathe forgiveness, y'all. We can breathe forgiveness out only when we have fully embraced it for ourselves from a most gracious God. I don't know where you are on your journey to forgiveness, but I pray that after these 11 lessons on the Genesis account of Joseph's life, you believe God and release any bitterness, any resentment, or any unforgiveness that has been weighing you down. All right, here's our question of the week. What has been the most important lesson you've learned during our journey with Joseph? And I need you, if you're watching on Wednesday at 12, watching on Wednesday at 6:30, I need you to join us on Dialpad as soon as I end this video to answer that question. What has been the most important lesson you've learned during our journey with Joseph? All right, my brothers and my sisters, as I said, this is it. We are about a week away from the resurrection. So please stay faithful on the journey. Continue to join us on the prayer calls. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Friday, 7 o'clock. Saturday, 7 o'clock. And then we'll be jumping into Holy Week. All right. We love you. We thank you for being a part of our discussion today. Join us on Dialpad, 804-203-9011 or meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC. All right. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.